To start off this morning, we're going to have Professor Luthans talk about psychological capital. And so Fred, it's all yours.
I'm glad to be here, and I jumped at the chance when Nick gave me the opportunity to talk with you. We only got half hour, which of course is hard for a professor to keep within that time frame like that. But anyway, I do want to let you know that first line there, 48 years here. So I've been around, and this is the most exciting time in my career that I've had because of this positivity stuff. And I happen to be on the ground floor that Nick was talking about because I was working with Gallup at the time as well as a senior scientist out there with them, along with my university position, of course. But I was there at the very first summit. So I was sitting in the audience. I wasn't given a paper at that time, but I was sitting there thinking, wow, they're not taking this to the workplace. They were all clinical psychologists, and of course, Seligman, Diener, all the top people in the field of positive psychology, but they really weren't taking it to the workplace. So I kind of thought, my epiphany to try to do that, and that's what I've done. So anyway, just to kind of give you the big picture here, I was born and raised on the Mississippi, so taking positive psychology and then what I created called positive organizational behavior. So my field is organizational behavior, which is more or less applied psychology in the workplace. And that together then came together into what I call psychological capital, or just PsyCap. Kind of have a branding here in the business school. We got to do stuff like that. So that's kind of shows you where I'm coming from in terms of the streams that I want to talk about. A couple of Nebraska stories, and I'm assuming that you all know about the North Platte Canteen. Anybody who doesn't know about that? Okay, so anyway, this is a great Nebraska story, and I think it's a great one to start the conference because during World War II, all the trains go through North Platte, going west to go over to the Pacific campaign, going east to go over to the European campaign, and they're all passing through North Platte, Nebraska, the UP. So they decided that the Nebraska train was coming through, and they decided, wow, we're going to send the boys off with cookies and cakes and cigarettes and other goodies like that at the time. And they felt, wow, we're going to just give a little bit of home before they go over. And so they waited because they wouldn't tell them exactly what time the train was coming through because of secrecy in terms of troop trains. So they waited, and here comes the train coming in. Oh boy, here's our Nebraska boys. Well, turned out it wasn't Nebraska boys. They were Kansas boys going off to war. And they thought, oh wow, we got all this stuff. Let's just give it to these guys. They're going to the war too. And they did. And wow. They got such a reception, such a warm felt reception from these Kansas boys, and they thought, one of them, Ray Wilson was her name, young woman whose brother was supposedly on the troop train that didn't show, and she's the one that more or less organized then this wonderful concept of the North Platte Canteen, because she felt, well, let's bring the community together, and they did. 6 million coming through over the next 5 years, and they served every one of those trains. Now, of course, North Platte couldn't do that themselves, so they called on 125 communities. I'm sure Lincoln was involved too, but especially around western Nebraska there, all the Kearneys and all the surrounding areas out there. They served 6 million out of their hides because it was all ration sugar and everything else that they were making, but they just wanted to have a little touch of home. And these guys coming through were so moved, but so were the participants. So were those who were giving. So, receive by giving type of thing, and that's a great example, I think, here in Nebraska that we always have, and everybody kind of, relates to this. Here's another one you may not, well, I know you don't know about this specific one, you may have heard of things like this. But I like this one too because I went up to my wife's aunt's 100th birthday up in the middle of North Dakota. This happened to be, that could be western Nebraska, same thing. But at her 100th birthday, one of the guys got up and talked about how wonderful this Aunt Caroline was to the community and all, and he was going on, and I thought, gee, that's really interesting. So I got him afterwards, and they're serving buttered bread for their snacks. Thought that was interesting, snacks. But anyway, I got to talking with this guy, and he says, yeah, you should see, you like what I said about her. I said, yeah, that was really touching, all the positive things you were saying and all. And he said, well, let me show you something. So he pulls out this picture that he then sent me this slide of, but he pulls out this picture. He said, we had one of our neighbors, everybody knows each other, of course, up there, and this is out of Hatton, North Dakota, and he had brain cancer. And of course, they were having problems with the weather, getting the harvest in and all, but there was a little break in the weather, and of course, where did 21 combines show up? Unorganized. Nobody got this, together or anything. They all showed up on, Farmer Smith's, whatever his name was, guy with the brain cancer's property to take in his harvest for him, help him out. 21 combines, because you can count them there, but there's some behind there too. And so he said, I called my wife, get her out here. There's a happening out in Smith's place. She came out, took that picture. She entered that picture in the Country Magazine photo contest. $25,000 reward or award she got for that picture. And of course, she gets the check in the mail. Of course, they wanted to go to Hawaii so bad and everything else with that $25K that she got. But of course, what did she do with it? Took it over to Smith's. Hey, here's some more for you to help out. So anyway, I like that story just to kind of get the tone set, because I'm going to lay some research on you now, but just kind of give you the attention-getting stories here of this is what we're all about, and this is, of course, what Nick is all about, trying to get the community together, trying to get the whole thing together and in a positive way like this. So everyone knows and believes, and especially I'm preaching to the choir here, but importance of positivity and happiness. Everybody believes that. It's important, sure. Happiness by giving, at whether the canteen there or the combines up in North Dakota. But especially academics like myself, I'm kind of got a raised eyebrow, too. Too fuzzy for serious study, too many balloons and smiley faces to really take sustainable impact on this whole happiness stuff. Ed Diener, who is known for the science of happiness before positive psychology, but then of course played a very important role in positive psychology. And he says, of course, now that we do have a science of happiness, okay? And he's a longtime professor at Illinois. He's just went emeritus, and then he said, well, I'm not really emeritus because now I'm teaching at Utah and Virginia as a faculty member. But anyway, that we have now neuroscientists actually measuring happiness in terms of brain scans and all that, as functional MRIs and so forth. We have positive psychology measuring happiness by simply asking, how happy are you? And a lot of people have trouble with, well, people won't tell you the truth, etc. Well, that's true of all self-report measures like this. There are problems with them, but they turn out to be as valid as this econ stuff. My colleagues over there in CBA, a lot of their measures are pretty darn soft as well. So we feel, again, that we're finding the measures of happiness. That's what I'm working on myself. I have a measure of psychological capital. I've had over 2,000 requests for that measure. That's people who bother to ask. So you can figure there's at least 3,000 studies going around the world on my stuff from my measure. And then, of course, this people's self-assessment is the same as what others say about them. So, these are some ways that we try to validate these soft measures of positivity. Now, we do have science that tells us where our positivity and happiness comes from. And I'm sure a lot of you know of Sonia Lyubomirsky, who has taken together all the basic research in positive psychology into her famous positivity circle. And what she tells us from this basic research is that about half of our happiness, half of our positivity, comes from genetics, i.e. nature, but also and nurture. So, in other words, our genes determine happiness, but so does how we were raised. You know, that's the nature and nurture. So about half of it, you know, is pretty much who we are in terms of a set point for happiness and positivity. She finds only 10% is due to circumstances. And most of us, of course, would put a lot more, especially the people who aren't at this conference, would put a lot more weight onto, well, it depends on your situation, how happy you are. But she says, you know, what they find from the studies again now, not off the top of her head, income, age, location, how you look, color of your skin, how old you are, those don't matter that much in terms of how happy you are. A little bit, of course. And in fact, positive psychologists are now putting even, at least in US dollars, about 50,000. If you make 50,000 a year, then income doesn't matter after that. You know, they got plenty of studies that show that people who are millionaires, the people who work for them, are just as happy as the millionaires who are employing them, for example. Here's the piece that we like, though, this intentional activity, the 40%. And that comes, again, from all of our work in the theory, etc., that here is the self-determined, state-like nature of positivity and happiness. This is our choices that we make. And that's a big chunk, not as big as the set point, the so-called hedonic treadmill that you can't do much about or you always return to. But that 40% piece is huge, and that's what we're operating on in the work that we do with that intentional piece. Now, here are some of the antecedents, and here's one quote. You know, you got all these quotes, and you know whether Abe Lincoln actually said this or not, but anyway, tribute to him. Most people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. A lot to that, okay? Now remember, that's where that 40% comes from. Your positivity and happiness is up to you, your choice. Like Nick, he chooses every morning, he says, to get up and be happy. Positive mindset or mindfulness. Live fully, in the moment. Be happy, positive. Ellen Langner. Now she's actually the first female that was given tenure in the psych department at Harvard. And she's a good friend of mine. I give programs with her in China, actually. But she has some great stuff on YouTube. If you have never looked into her stuff, just look her up because she's really got good stuff on mindfulness. Now, positive psychology, of course, is, you know, talking about the importance of positivity over negativity, but not all positive. In other words, we can't, you know, there are some optimal levels of happiness, for example. And there are a lot of people now trying to point that out to give this the counterbalancing side of all this. This is Barbara Fredrickson, who is one of the originals. She was at the Lincoln Conference as well. And she was at Michigan for years, but now she's at North Carolina. But anyway, she's pointing out, it's kind of like the analogy with a sailing ship. You've got the mast, which is positivity. That's the wind behind our sails. That's what makes us go. But she does say you got to have a keel, okay? And the keel is the negativity. You've got to have some realistic optimism, not just optimism. You have to have some steering that the keel serves. Because if you don't have a keel on the yacht, what happens? Flops over. Can't direct it, okay? Now, here's what I've developed, this positive psychological capital. So if you Google Scholar, my name, I've got 25,000 citations, and I think Dick Deanspear at least will know that's quite a few. And my H factor is 77, which means I have at least 77 articles with 77 or more citations. In the academic world, that's how we keep score. How impactful are we? And that's pretty proud of that, actually. And I started this, again, right after the conference. It takes at least a year for these things to get going. So I did, right after that Lincoln conference, where Gallup was located right north of St. E's out there at the time, to get that article out on positive organizational behavior. And then I created this book, which I don't see on the table out here, but anyway, that came out in 2007, called Psychological Capital. Now we've just come out, in fact, I sent the copy edited manuscript back this week to have an update on what we call Psychological Capital and Beyond, which will be coming out right after the first of the year. So what is PsyCap? Okay, first of all, in the business school, they're all just thrilled about economic capital over there. That's what all the finance stuff is about. That's what the econ stuff is about. That's what the accounting stuff is about. They're just totally into, economic capital is basically what you have, and the accountants keeping track of what you have, and the financial people trying to leverage that capital to get a return on investment that's better than the cost of money, et cetera, et cetera. We're not talking about that. We are talking about human capital, and that's a big deal in my field of organizational behavior and human resource management, is this human capital, what you and your staff know. And then, of course, recently, everybody's into social capital, which is the social networking stuff, the relationship stuff, very important. Good research going on in social networking today. And then psychological capital. Intentions, that 40% piece of who we are and who we can become. So that's basically not that this, that these are all differential, but just kind of let you see how we fit in with the other so-called capitals, right? So what is PsyCap then? We have certain criteria that we started from in the beginning, because things like, I don't know if you know about emotional intelligence, but of course that's very popular for many years now. But it's not popular in the academic field because they didn't do their homework very well in terms of measurement, in terms of doing the research to relate with performance outcomes, etc. So we set up our scientific criteria of number 1, theory and research, number 2, valid measurement, number 3, and here's a key one, state-like as opposed to trait-like, meaning we can develop this stuff that we're talking about, as opposed to personality, which is trait-like, fairly fixed, not immutable, but fairly fixed, okay? So that's a criteria in order to be included into psychological capital. And then the fourth one, because I am in the business school, I'm not where Dean Spear is over there in psychology, I'm in the business school. We have to have impact on performance, effective organizations. So that's the fourth criteria in order to be included. So we literally went through all the positive psychology stuff, and the ones that came out were, number 1, hope, having the will and the way, which comes from the work of Rick Snyder at the University of Kansas, fortunately deceased not too many years ago, but again, he developed this hope concept. Efficacy, which is my mentor, Albert Bandura, same program I came out of the University of Iowa, best living psychologist in terms of both of APA and so forth. Resiliency, bouncing back and beyond, and then optimism, positive attributions and expectations. Those 4, out of all possibilities, met our criteria better than others. Now, we look at other things. We're not saying that this is an exhaustive list of what should be included in psychological capital, but fortunately for us, when you arrange those words, comes out to be HERO. Wow, that was fortunate. We did not start off with that, okay, just so you know that. But of course, the biggest hero of mine, at least, Nelson Mandela. I hope to get an honorary doctorate from Mandela University in South Africa in the first of the year. They tell me I'm getting one anyway. I haven't got that yet. But anyway, this stands for hero, and that's a nice way to remember what's involved in PsyCap, the hero within us. That's based on theory, has valid measurement, state-like and open to development, and then the fourth component, impact. Now, this stuff is just taken off. I'm going all over the world with this, and I'll show you some of the evidence of that here in just a minute. But we are going to all kinds of organizations in the US, Asian and European organizations, 1,300 at the time, but now we're over 2,000 plus, formal requests for our measures and our background. I literally get several emails a day trying to help graduate students and so forth, which gets a little old, but we've done work with sales associates, we've done work with bank employees, we've done work with aerospace. Our big laboratory is Boeing. Entrepreneurs, insurance services, team-level bank branches and operations and maintenance teams, restaurant chains, big time in the restaurant industry. And then most of our studies, a cross-section of firms, meaning that we gather data across organizations. And then, of course, healthcare and education. My two sons, who are professors, my younger son is the head of the management department at UNK. He does work in the healthcare area. My other son is a professor down at Missouri Western in St. Joe, and he's doing work on education with students on PsyCap. So those are just a few of the applications. Now here's some of the research results, and we'll wind this down. Still emerging, but impressive research support for an evidence-based approach to PsyCap. So here's our meta-analysis, 51 independent studies, 12,000 people sampled in these 51 studies, and we relate PsyCap to performance at 0.3. Now 0.3 is not that big, and I deliberately tell you, this is not a 0.9 kind of science we're in. We're in a 0.3 level of science, but that's accounting for approximately 10% of the variance in these studies. In other words, we can account for about 10% of the performance in these 51 studies that we can attribute to our psychological capital. What else goes into performance? Technology, financial capital, luck. You know, a lot of other things go into performance, but if we can control 10% of that, that's competitive advantage in our business. And then, of course, higher relationship with various desired work attitudes, job satisfaction, organizational commitment, organizational citizenship behaviors at about a 0.5 plus or minus level. So that's what our meta-analysis shows, okay? And that's taking all studies that up to that time, we have more now, when we did the meta-analysis. So this is the average impact, some higher, some lower, but average, that's what we're getting. Now, just to fit in where PsyCap is on the continuum here, on the left we have pleasures, moods, emotions. Very difficult to get any sustained change or development out of that. A lot of that's going on in the positive movement, is this left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you've got this new breakthroughs in neuroscience, etc. Our hardwiring, our talents, our genetic endowment, very difficult, if not impossible, to change. Then in between, we have state-like and trait-like. We're on the state-like side, meaning that our HERO components can be developed, and we're doing that work right now. So here's kind of the summary of experimental published research. Now, this published research means that it goes through the bells and whistles of all the scientific process, control group design, etc. And we can show that we can improve PsyCap in relatively short training programs and cause performance to improve after going through these programs. We did a lot of that work actually in Boeing, working on the 787, biggest product in America, 787, the Dreamliner, replacing all commercial aircraft. So the guys working on that were going through PsyCap training with us. Here's the bottom line. Now, I'm not going to go through the formulas, but I want to hopefully impress you that we do our homework. So here is actually what we call utility analysis that is in the published literature again, of getting to a point of going through a training program, how much does it cost and how much return do you get from the cost of that training? So this was at actual numbers at Boeing. So the return that we could calculate was $73,000. The cost of the training, taking these guys, $100,000 a year engineers off their job for a 2.5-hour training program, sticking it into the formula to get a return on development or the return on investment. That's just how the finance people do it too. That's your revenues minus your cost over your cost to get 270% return on investment. Wow. You think that doesn't get people's attention across the world? Well, it did. Because now they can have a win-win here, i.e., they're concerned about their employees, we like this positive stuff, and oh, by the way, we can get a nice performance return out of these positivity stuff that they're talking about. So I just have to show you a few pictures. This is in Jakarta, Indonesia, and I'm giving a talk over there, but it just happened to have that hero in the background there. So I again lucked out there, but anyway, in the picture I had to show you that. But you also see the A&W sign there, American, fast food. Here's a program I'm doing in China. I can't read that Chinese, but you can see underneath there, psychological capital, mastering the art of happiness. So you guys are getting that, but he's actually my PhD student, Wei Xing Li here, translating. And then again, just to show you China Mobile. You know how big China Mobile is? 500,000 employees. So I'm working with China Mobile. Why? China is not, they're doing great economically, but not in terms of happiness, not in terms of well-being. Gallup polls show them real down, far down the chart, further down than the US, which is like 17th, and China's like 92nd. But they're concerned about that, of course, as the protesters are now, knocking on their gates. They have to pay attention to the human side. So these guys hired me to try to do this, and of course, through their technology, we take it all over the country. Here is some, I did this for Bob Brown here, show you some extension of PsyCap into some actual numbers that we're doing, because we can adapt our instrument into PsyCap relationships, where people are that healthy, robust relationship with how satisfied people are, i.e. the higher their PsyCap, the higher their hero within, the greater their satisfaction. And even objective measures, the higher their PsyCap, the more time they spend with family and friends. And here's the health one. We can also adapt our measures to health. So what we find is that the higher people's PsyCap, the more they're satisfied with their health. That's an easy one. But then also, look at this. The higher their PsyCap, the lower their BMI, body mass index, and even the lower their cholesterol. So with that, I just want to show you the impact this is having around the world, all over Asia, all over the US, all over Asia. And then again, just in the last 2 years, big programs in Norway, and I could explain each of these to you, but just to hopefully impress you, this stuff is really taking off. Finland, England, South Africa, Italian, French, and here's one I'm really interested in. We're going to do the whole country of Lithuania. And we're gathering data, and then we're going to do interventions. Why Lithuania? They're in big trouble, wellness-wise, health, happiness-wise, with their trouble that Ukraine is having. Lithuania is having, the so-called Baltic states up there are having. So, need for talent and leadership development, performance, and well-being for global competitiveness. So, I'm not saying PsyCap is the answer. You don't need any more of that. But we do feel that there's just too much research evidence to ignore it or write it off as just too soft or another fad. So, with our PsyCap, we can be on top of the world, and may the PsyCap force be with you.